All right, welcome to this next session, everyone. Dorothy, we aren't in Emeryville anymore. Root causes and durable cures. I want to welcome to the stage Markus Niebanck, Principal, Amicus Strategic Environmental Consulting, who will be moderating this session. Welcome, Markus.
Everybody's so scattered. Markus Niebanck, thanks for the introduction. It's great to see you guys. My co-presenters are Richard Parks from the Redeemer Community Partnership and Zhang from Los Angeles Community Land Trust and Neighborhood Land Trust. Sorry, they're just my client. They'll tell you a little bit more about what they do when we get to their section of the session. There it is. There's Dorothy, there's Emeryville. This comes from a presentation, a conversation that I have once a year at Cal that's about 2 hours long. So I'm going to try to condense that into my 15 minutes, and I just apologize in advance if I go too fast or it's too fragmented. Two topics that we'll touch on today. One is the primary reasons for what? Yeah? It's so loud when I'm this close, it's loud. Primary reasons for brownfields in the first place. why there are brownfields in America primarily, and why in certain situations where, post-Genesis, why they continue to exist. At the end of that first section, I'll navigate into placemaking and advocacy, and that's where Richard and Bees are going to take over and talk about what they do. So fundamentally, over the years, I got curious about the why. Why do they exist in the first place? Why is this land still abandoned in many communities? And I had these conversations with many in this space. They weren't abandoned because they were contaminated. And in many cases, they're not still abandoned because they're contaminated. There's other reasons for the complications that this real estate experiences. And we focus in these conferences primarily on the contamination aspect. I just wanted to add a little bit to the conversation around the other factors that I've experienced in freezing and abandoning real estate. So I'm just going to go through, there's four main reasons that I haven't discovered. I mean, these have been discovered, but these have kind of floated to the top, and folks don't really talk about them a lot. The biggest, the most substantial factor in the abandonment of American post-industrial land was the invention of the container ship. I mean, it's that simple, because before there was the ability to manufacture goods overseas, everything had to be made here. With the introduction of the container ship in the middle 1950s and its evolution to these Death Star boats that you see today, there is no such restriction, and things are made where labor is cheap. And that was one of the primary reasons for large-scale abandonment of American industrial real estate. And it continued. NAFTA was another. First was the boat, then were trade practices that America entered into that encouraged the offshoring of American business. Another reason is, and I need to reverse these slides because this kind of went before the big boats, was post-war economies, was the boom and the bust particularly around World War II. This is a picture of the Oakland Army base, and it's kind of writ large. I'm from Northern California, I'm in Oakland. I do a lot of work in West Oakland, and West Oakland is a fantastic example of an economy. It was a stable community. It blew up in World War II, and this was a logistics base, but there's also Hunters Point in San Francisco, there's Mare Island, there's the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and the effect of an incredible influx of humans and capital, and then their disappearance at the end of the war, and the ones that left were the ones that could leave, and the folks that left behind were not as skilled as the ones that left. Didn't have as much money as the ones that left. They were able to get by, but it was, this kind of planning had a huge, or lack of planning, had a huge impact on these communities. Related to this, people thought that what was left behind after these booms and busts and these post-industrial migrations, was blight. And they described it as blight. And the people, the smarter people in the room, thought that the way to solve for blight was to tear it down, was to take people out of privately owned homes, right, where they had generational wealth, knock those homes down, build public housing, and then force these same people to move back into public housing, destroying generational wealth and economic investment in their communities. The lower right-hand corner, that's the Western Addition, or the Fillmore District in San Francisco, along with urban renewal, so to speak, was Robert Moses and his idea of running freeways through poor communities. That's Highway 980 that essentially separated West Oakland from downtown Oakland. All of these things that at the time, I guess, seemed like a good idea. The one slide on the lower right, that if it was extended, it would say relocation. And it was a movement in Oakland, and it happened other places, but I'm most familiar with what happened in Oakland, just about displacing humans from their owned real estate, reinventing it in somebody else's imagination, and then asking people to move back in and try to make a go of it. Fourth reason, last reason, nothing to do with cities, but it's as interesting, and you hear folks talk about it a little bit here, the challenge of rural brownfields. Where the rural brownfields stem from is the early 1970s agricultural policy that was the advent of industrial ag in America. And it killed the family farm, it killed Main Street, it replaced what used to require hundreds and thousands of people to make happen in a good way with multinational corporations that essentially resulted in what you have here. So those are the causes. And you don't necessarily have to know the causes to have a good sense of where to go to fix the situation, but I think it helps. These are so what you're left with, right? So those are the four causes. And now we have stubborn brownfields, because brownfields that are in places where people want to invest and redevelop get redeveloped. Brownfield, no matter how contaminated they are, if it's in demand, somebody's going to figure out a way to make it happen. The stubborn brownfields are places where there isn't an automatic economic there. And the rural communities are really a perfect example. It used to be the crossroads of America where people would come on the weekends to shop for things for their family, for feed for their animals, and now that's all delivered by trucks from multinationals. And how do you solve for that? Especially if you're dealing with contaminated property. The first thing, in my experience, that you have to realize is it's not the contamination that's causing these properties to not be redeveloped. And here's just a couple. In the stubborn brownfield, their location, they're out of the mainstream. They're either too big or they're too small. They don't have connectivity. They don't have utilities. Some places, again, in the urban areas in America, I've seen it in a big way in Oakland, is land banking, where capital will take land out of circulation because they think that they're going to be able to get a better return at some point 5, 10, 20 years down the road, without really thinking about what taking that land out of circulation does to the community. It might pencil for them in their calculus, but it doesn't pencil for the community. So these are the things planners, developers, communities should understand when they're thinking about how can I attract resources to the abandoned real estate in my neighborhood. It's not just contamination. It's all of these other things. The Emeryville part of the story that, Ignacio, you could just come up and tell or correct me. I was blessed because I got to work inside the city for a couple of years as a contractor. And I learned more about this kind of thing there than I have virtually any place else, except here, like here too. Emeryville, everybody knows Emeryville, right? For the most part? I mean, it was 30 years ago when Emeryville reinvented itself. And folks that haven't been in this business that long might not have a sense of what Emeryville looked like before it looks like what it does now. And if you want to go rent Harold and Maude, because there's a scene from Harold and Maude when they're sitting down in the mud flats in the artscape, and industrial Emeryville is just going to town, pile drivers and smokestacks behind you. But thanks to the reasons, especially boats and post-war boom and bust, a lot of industry left Emeryville, not at the same time, but within a relatively short period of time. And in the 70s, it looked like what the lower right-hand corner looks like. Loma Prieta in 90, was it 90? It was 90, right? Loma Prieta? 89? Loma Prieta was kind of like the period at the end of a bad sentence. What was left standing, after the industrial exodus was destroyed by Loma Prieta. But what Emeryville had going for it was, well, it had many things going for it. In my estimation, what it really had going for it was a really small government. Small government, super smart people. The population of Emeryville was relatively small. It meant that the folks that were planning and preparing to execute on a vision didn't have the same kind of obstacles that you would experience in other metropolitan settings. And what they also realized, while Emeryville looked like it was a mess, and it had this reputation as a contaminated, toxic place, it also had other attributes that were complicating its redevelopment. And I've listed a few of them here. It was great geography, but it's right at the intersection of Interstate 80 off to the Bay Bridge. It was a place that people drove past to get to other places. So it was really well located, but it wasn't where you would stop, and it didn't look like a place that you wanted to stop. It was super hard to get into the places where the industrial operations used to exist. So it was complicated. It looked really tough, but it had other things going for it besides the small government. The parcels were pretty big, and again, if you could solve for the I want to drive past this, it had great geography. Oh, it's the wrong button. So what the folks it really was, it was magical, and that's why I love the story so much. I didn't know this story until I got to come inside, and then it was through conversations with some of the folks that were still there that had done this that it all started to come together. One of the first things that the city did was accessibility, and I don't show it here. The upper right-hand corner is Bay Street, Emeryville, and that's a mall that kind of sits in the curve on the left black and white picture. You couldn't get to Bay Street, which is a mall and a residential development, easily, right, to the parcel that occupies that. But you see the road that fronts Bay Street on the left-hand side of the photograph. One of the first things that the city did was build that road, build an overpass over the railroad tracks, connect that part of Emeryville to the rest of Emeryville and Oakland and points to the east. Made a huge and immediate difference with respect to the developability of that land. Emeryville was able to, at the time, rely on redevelopment agency tools that permitted tax increment financing. They were able to buy property themselves. They were able to assemble small parcels into large developable parcels that would then be more obviously marketed to folks that don't like to solve for such things. They would prefer to move in once those problems are solved. I have 5 minutes. I can take a drink of water. But one of the aspects that I found most intriguing, like those are big things, right? They're not necessarily obvious things, but they're big things. They also, at the same time, right? One more I'll interject in here. The Polanco Act at the time, and I'm not going to describe it because I wouldn't be able to do it well. It was another tool of redevelopment agencies that would compel. It's kind of mean. It would compel a property owner to pay for the cleanup of their own property that then was going to be taken from them by somebody else for redevelopment. But it was super effective. And it was that permitted the administration of this land reprogramming that wouldn't have been able to be reprogrammed but for that particular tool that was in their toolbox. The aspect of Emeryville that I think I like the most, though, is the placemaking aspect. there were, what you see in that photograph on the left, that's the big post-industrial Emeryville. To the right of that off the screen, you don't see it, but there were railroad spurs that went to other industries that were in areas that were they were off the beaten track. They were gonna be harder to redevelop. They weren't that obvious. There wasn't a there. I haven't experienced it any place else. The lower right-hand corner has the Emeryville Greenway. Are folks familiar with that? Emeryville Greenway was a spur off of the Union Pacific Main Line that you see in the black and white photograph that ran up to Berkeley and serviced smaller factories along the way. They abandoned the spur when the factories closed. And what the city did was turn it into a walking path with kind of a necklace, and the pearls on that necklace were community gardens and parks. And what the city was able to do was create a there where a there hadn't previously existed. And now housing and small business and restaurants and artists occupy that space that otherwise it was just an overgrown, weedy, abandoned railroad track. And I mean, everything is great about the Emeryville story, but that is my favorite aspect. So this is my last slide. And this is kind of a transition slide. The Baldwin Hills, the Inglewood oil field in Los Angeles, isn't a brownfield yet because it's still occupied by producing oil wells. But there's a move to move oil out of Los Angeles. And this is almost 1,000 acres of land that when it is no longer an oil field is going to be something else. And this is an opportunity for people to be proactive in a way that other folks didn't really have the opportunity. Nobody saw the World War II boom and bust coming. Nobody really planned around boats and Earl Butts, and industrial ag didn't care. But this is going to be a long time coming. And this blank canvas can be painted on in a much different way than the canvases that have gone before it. And that's what Bees and Richard are going to talk about is their work in this space around placemaking, around advocacy, oil writ large, not just Baldwin Hills. But I thought I would include it just because it's going to be really fascinating. It's going to be a ton of fun for whoever gets to play in that space. And that's it, right? I'm good. Thanks so much. Richard Parks, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the.
Okay, thank you, Markus. It is really exciting to think about what could unfold in the Inglewood oil field, notwithstanding the judge's recent decision to overturn the ordinances that phase out oil extraction. So the next 2 weeks, we have a bill sitting on the governor's desk that could restore local control to the county and the city and other local jurisdictions across the state. And hopefully that will create the opportunity for a lot of that exciting visioning to happen. My name is Richard Parks. I serve with Redeemer Community Partnership. I'm the founding president of this very small community-based organization in our neighborhood in South Central Los Angeles. And Markus has asked me just to kind of walk you through our community's journey to address a toxic oil drill site in our community. So let me, here we go, let me see, does this work? Yes, so this is the Jefferson, what was once the Jefferson oil drill site. I'll start with giving you a little bit of history. So back in the 1960s, Union Oil came into our community and purchased a number of parcels, demolished the homes that were on them to make way for this drill site that was in a very already densely populated urban neighborhood. And then using horizontal drilling technology, they drilled this kind of web of wells, oil wells, out underneath the community and began oil extraction. Well, it didn't take long for the easy oil to have been, exhausted. And so to get at the hydrocarbons that remained, it was necessary for kind of a succession of oil companies to resort to more extreme extraction techniques. So I'm sure you've heard of fracking, but fracking doesn't work in our geology. And so they had to use a method that was even more toxic called acidization. Basically what happened is the oil company would bring these tanker trucks, each with a carrying capacity of 5,000 gallons, each filled with air toxins, endocrine disruptors, carcinogens, and they would pump this acid into the ground to dissolve the geology and create pathways to bring the oil up to the surface. But as you can see, this happened just 10 feet from bedroom windows. It was really interesting. On one side of the wall, we would see workers in head-to-toe protective gear standing behind red danger tape. And meanwhile, residents would have no notice that this was going on. There were times when we'd see up to 4 tankers at a time, representing 20,000 gallons of this acid. In one case, the ambient fumes were so intense, they chemically burned the plants outside the drill site. Just some of the other things that were going on, we'd see the oil company spraying this toxic odor counteractant. It was something called Chemco Odor Controlled Jasmine that was sprayed to mask the presence of another toxic gas called hydrogen sulfide. But some of the ingredients in this odor counteractant were endocrine disruptors that caused reproductive harm and birth defects. And so as we were looking into the drill site, we also began to notice that there were big differences for how the city treated oil drill sites in wealthier, whiter West LA communities relative to how they treated the ones in South LA and Wilmington. So you can see the West LA drill sites are enclosed, but the South LA drill sites were wide open. The West LA drill sites used electric workover rigs, but in South LA, in our neighborhood in Wilmington, they would only use diesel. And so that prompted us to begin to organize in our community. And I'm going to run through the story very quickly, but really began to call attention to the operating violations on the site, the health and community impacts of these facilities, calling out really the city's sacrificial zoning of our neighborhood. And finally, after years, the city agreed finally to extend to our community the same protections that they had given to West LA 20 years ago. The oil company appealed, they lost their appeal, they went to court, we went to court with them with the help of our partners at Earth Justice, a national law firm some of you may be familiar with that does really excellent work. And finally, the oil company said, you know, we would rather close than comply with these conditions. So as you can imagine, we celebrated that decision, but not for long, because we knew that if we did not start to think about what would become of that drill site, the violence of oil extraction would be replaced with the violence of displacement as drive-by developers are coming in, tearing down homes, building up student housing, driving out longtime residents. And so as the oil company went to work to demolish the oil works on the site, we went to work to bring our neighbors together to try and surface this shared vision. And so what emerged out of a series of charrettes was 3 priorities that the community had. One was for a neighborhood park, affordable housing, and some kind of a community center on these parcels. So that was a very exciting vision, but it exceeded kind of our expertise. And so we began to reach out to partners who could help us realize this vision on the site. And one of the first partners we reached out to was the LA Neighborhood Land Trust, with just a wonderful track record of redeveloping brownfields and turning them into really beautiful public spaces. So I'm excited that you'll get to hear from these in just a minute. We turned to the LA Neighborhood Housing Services, which is kind of a wonderful housing developer in Los Angeles. And then we began to reach out to our local elected leaders. And Our Assembly member, Reggie Jones Sawyer, was able to put into the state budget a $10 million request that then gave us the resources to negotiate, to purchase, to acquire the drill site. And that acquisition was completed by the land trust. We figured the oil company was a lot more excited to deal with the land trust than to deal with Redeemer Community Partnership, who had been working to shut them down for so many years. But the land trust was able to close on that property last November. And so it's now ours. And so the drill site has gone from this, over the last several decades, now to this. And we are, together with Markus and the land trust, really stepping into this work of realizing the community's vision. It feels like we've been given beauty for ashes, and it's really exciting to see kind of how this project is unfolding. And so I think I'll turn it over to you, V's.
All right. Last one. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you. Oh my goodness, what happened? Oh, I pressed on it. I pressed on your trackpad. I apologize. Okay, let me get back to where we were. Thank you all for being here so much, and thank you to my co-panelists. I'm really excited to hopefully have time to discuss a little bit and chat a little bit, so I'm gonna do my best to keep this brief. My name is Zhang. I'm a project manager with the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. And just one sentence about me, I started as a visual artist and a community organizer. I then got my master's in architecture and became licensed as an architect. Very reformed, however, if anybody has any beef with architects. And so I kind of bridged those two trainings to do the kind of work that we get to do at the Land Trust. And you'll see here I've written on the screen health and justice through parks and gardens. A lot of folks convened about 22 years ago, practitioners, advocates, community members, agency partners across LA County to found this nonprofit land trust. And since that time, we've co-created with community partners 30 parks and gardens encompassing over 22 acres of public green space and serving over 500,000 residents across the county. And we kind of do this by operating under 3 pillars under one roof. So not just park development, which is a lot of what I do, but a lot of the rest of the team is working on advocacy and policy in coalition spaces, such as Stand LA, Stand Together Against Neighborhood Drilling, or other coalitions around affordable housing and housing justice. And then thirdly, stewardship of the parks and gardens that we run. So we have 200 community gardeners that are part of our network across the county, and we work with high school students as garden apprentices and so on and so forth. It's really important, as we all know at this conference, because park inequity has been sort of baked into our urban spaces by design, and so some of that structural pieces have been touched upon by Richard and Markus and everybody in this conference. I'll kind of take my time to share 2 additional examples as case studies along with the Jefferson drill site, and then hopefully we can chat a little bit afterwards. And one thing I just want to note as a nonprofit working toward environmental and climate justice through this stewardship design and development is some of the contradiction inherent in land projects. I think it's worth seeding into our conversations, not just land acknowledgement, which is wonderful when we do it, but sort of an acknowledgement in my work, especially as somebody who is a licensed architect, of the inherent contradictions in doing land projects on stolen land. So some of that I would encourage myself and everybody here to lean into that discomfort, and it's something that we do in our team as well. As there's a type of holding of both how contradictory it is to even work with stolen land, but also having a bias towards action and an awareness of the power and privileges that we can leverage toward futures that include all of us. So the first project I want to talk about is not too far from here in West Carson, in the unincorporated part, called Wishing Tree Park. And how I want to talk about it is actually through the name of it. Wishing Tree was a tree that had been planted by some of the neighbors, two young girls who were siblings, 10 to 20 years ago. The tree outgrew its pot and seeded itself into the soil, and neighbors and community members would hang wishes on the tree, wishing for a better future in the neighborhood, and we took that, and the community members voted on that as the name of it. So Wishing Tree Park is an 8.5 acre former Superfund adjacent site that has been transformed by our community partner, Del Amo Action Committee, and us. We actually had our groundbreaking and park opening in, our park opening ceremony in May 2024, so this year. And it included over 200 new trees, new amenities that were envisioned by the community members, and a half-mile of walking trails, and in a community that did not have access to very many public open spaces, as we know. And I think this was a photo from our ribbon cutting, in the Tribute Plaza that listed the names. So all those leaves in the mosaic are all the names of the families who organized to protect the space. Some of the background about the site, including our partner, Del Amo Action Committee, is that back in the 90s, folks started finding residue, big traces of chemicals that were left over from Shell and Dow Chemical. This goes back to the 1940s, which exactly kind of was covered by Markus earlier in his remarks. This was the exact, like how we see the residue from the historical structures that shaped our urban landscape coming up later on as these brownfields and Superfund sites. The families recognizing that it was no longer safe to live there, were able to organize into the Del Amo Action Committee, navigate a very lengthy bureaucratic process of having them relocated and having the land kind of acquired, and then continuing to organize for multiple decades before we were brought on LA Neighborhood Land Trust to help acquire the site from the chemical companies in 2015, so 2 decades later after they first formed. And so these family members are incredibly organized and determined. Even though they have already been displaced, they continue to hold on to the there, to use Markus's setup. And because of that, they have been able to not only envision the park, identify a partner who can help support with that, but they continue, they have other campaigns going on. This is just actually one piece of that project for them. And so I kind of like to list who are all the kinds of folks that come together in these spaces. We definitely had as a partner the county as well in this case. So kind of navigating between the county, a nonprofit land trust, and this community organization. There are different ways different strengths that each of us brought to the table in terms of navigating these processes that are super interesting, I think, to dive a little bit more into. But for time, I will kind of share a few images here, and again, to echo Markus, all the unequal distribution of detriments and benefits, in our environment are historically by design, and historically, this has been why not only has this land been contaminated, but the particular challenges that the community members faced, were not just contamination, although that was deeply resource intensive and finance intensive, but actually just navigating the systems in order to achieve a community vision, right? And so, as Richard has touched upon as well, I think a big part of, continuing to support Del Amo Action Committee's work is now for the benefits of this park now to still be distributed amongst the folks who bore the brunt of the degradation of the site, right? So I think we're constantly navigating that in the project at Jefferson, and also at any project that we find ourselves working on. The second project I wanted to share, in contrast to the Jefferson drill site, is Speaker Anthony Rendon Riverfront Park, formerly known as Maywood Riverfront Park in the city of Maywood. Maywood is, I think, the densest city west of the Mississippi. It's like 30,000 residents in like a square mile, and extremely so-called park poor. This is a 5-acre park that already exists, and it already exists, so why am I talking about it? There's an interesting reason why we are working on renovating this park, and also how it came to be. It is a former industrial site, and a portion of it was a Superfund site. It was a Pemmico site, and then the 2 other parcels that are part of it had other industrial uses as well, and it sits along the LA River near the historic site of the Sleepy Lagoon, which was a historic watering hole that Mexican youth and other youth of color were using in this period of segregation in LA. And it was also the site of racialized violence against those youth by a white mob. And so there's a bunch of different kinds of forces that you can imagine that come together to make this happen. And I want to list like all of our community partners as to, and kind of identify how they were involved. So, the Superfund site ASP history kind of it happened back in the 90s, or the Pemmico industrial history spanned the 40s to the 90s, and then from the 90s into the 2000s, with EPA support, the city of Maywood was able to clean it up and turn it into a park. We come into this in the late 2010s. So East Yard's Communities for a Better Environment, East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice, led a visioning project around the Sleepy Lagoon. So they brought on Tongva elders and community members. They brought on artists and other community organizations to envision how we can understand this history that happened in that area, and how we could tell that story through the built environment, right? Through that visioning process, folks identified Maywood Riverfront Park, now Speaker Anthony Rendon Riverfront Park, as a really wonderful place to have that memorial appear. Concurrently, we were working with Communities for a Better Environment and the city of Maywood through a project called the LINK Project, which was brought together to support small cities with technical partners and community-based organizations to identify opportunities for park equity. This is all like big mouthfuls of things, but hopefully I'm being clear. And so with our partners, Communities for a Better Environment, we conducted outreach with the city of Maywood and also identified the Riverfront Park as a space that was beloved, but that was starting to get a little bit run down, that could use a little bit of TLC. And so as the culmination of all of this community engagement and community visioning, we returned back to this park that was a former Superfund site and started a new process to plan the renovation. Part of what we do there's 2 points I want to make about the design process that we're doing currently at this moment. One is that we still have to look at that industrial history. So our landscape architects, the first thing that they did was kind of diagram out what the different industrial histories were and what we can and cannot do. So if we cannot go past 2 feet, if we cannot go past 5 feet, and so on and so forth. And that information was immediately downloaded with our community partners and shared out back to the community members. And this is part of like rebuilding a lot of trust that has been lost over the years in terms of, people making decisions on behalf of the communities that are living and working and playing there every day. So that was a big part of our design process, was just sharing what we're learning, sharing the technical information that we are able to access. The second point I'll make, and then I'll sort of like wrap it up so we can chat, is we brought all of these different community partners who entered the process at different points into one design steering committee. And so, moving forward into this next phase of the park renovation, we are able to expand the table from one that was originally the city of Maywood, doing the best they can, to city of Maywood with an MOU with a nonprofit. That's sort of our legal agreement, our MOU, to a much larger table that had all of those folks in. And because of that, we've been able to fold in other kinds of events, like a mural restoration, celebrations of community, and this memorial, that kind of has actually attracted additional funding to support the park because we've incorporated that storytelling and placemaking that Markus and Richard are talking about into that piece. And so I had a few slides here to kind of just come back to the Park and Affordable Housing Project for Jefferson, but I'm gonna just come to the end of it to say, one of the things that I'm so inspired by with the work that we're doing with Richard and Redeemer and Community Partnership, as well as having Markus, who, by the way, has consulted with us, has kind of helped us navigate through both of those other projects that I mentioned. Is the way that we're able to conceive of ourselves in a social movement ecosystem and think about what each of us, has access to or is able to, leverage as a strength or, in our work together. And also to, come back to this recent regulatory setback that we're having in Southern California, and understand that we're moving into a place where we can be more proactive about acquiring these sites of extraction and sites of contamination and industrial use before we wait another 50 years to take action. So thank you. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Engagement. Anybody have some questions, comments, interested in anything that we've been talking about?
I have a comment and a couple of questions.
Excellent.
Somebody wants me to use the mic.
Is there a mic? You have one up here, Ignacio. Oh, there you go.
If you heard me speak this morning, I said that's the first time anybody actually asked me to speak louder. I've been shushed all my life. Can you hear me? Okay, yes, you can hear me. I better back off a little bit. Well, first off, I think you presented some of the finest examples of brownfields. I'm going to use the word that Director Guzman used earlier, redemption. Some of the finest examples of brownfield redemption, repurposing, revitalization that I've heard in quite a while. I'd like to compliment the panel also on the presentation itself. I found you to be articulate and lucid speakers and very effective communicators. So you have at least my vote for the best talk that I attended today. Appreciate that very much. I have two questions. As a technical guy and an environmental consultant working on the ECRG, I was curious if you were able to tap into the ECRG at all, because this is exactly the kind of thing they love to fund. The second question, and this might be a longer answer, and I can ask you at happy hour. I'm, again, as the technical guy, curious about the spectrum and magnitude of the contamination, particularly on the South LA field. So with that, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. We were able to leverage ECRG on the Jefferson site, and it's a longer story. We have an assessment grant. A lot of work has been done before we got involved, and we have to replicate some of it because it was done not under agency oversight. But that grant is definitely going to make the next step a lot easier than it would have otherwise been. And which was the other site that you were interested in?
Well, the South LA site, and I was curious about the spectrum and magnitude of the contamination.
Oh, at the Jefferson site, at that
Yes.
same site.
Yes.
The complication, the interesting aspect about Jefferson, in my experience, and I worked on Newport Banning Ranch most recently. I don't know how many wells I had, but it was like a 400-acre well field. Drill sites are a lot easier to manage than refineries, just because of the nature of the product that you're working with. And the circumstance at Jefferson is not dissimilar. What Jefferson has that other places don't is a dry cleaner right across the street. And that dry cleaner has complicated the redevelopability. I think it made it a little easier to acquire. The price tag was a little lower. It's just down the street from USC, so it's a perfect spot for housing. If it was clean or if it was minimally contaminated, somebody would have really fought to make that other vision happen. But thanks to the dry cleaner, and it's not on your list, but we had talked about that earlier. Ariel and I talked about it earlier. Family-owned dry cleaner. It's been in the family a long time. They have no idea what has escaped from their operation onto other people's property, and they're fixing to find out. One thing that we're going to be able to do, hopefully, is to help them navigate that in a way that would be different than a traditional developer who would just say, "Here's a hook. I'm going to put you on it, and you're on your own." So hopefully we can solve for that too.
Another success story.
Hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ariel, did you have a question?
It was the same question. Second also is you guys are great speakers and this was really beautiful, beautiful stories and just makes me want to join the team.
Join the team.
And then second also, I was curious about what does remediation look like when you have a webbing of contamination going underneath all of these homes and important, how do you even tackle something so huge and what did that look like? Was it just local cleanup or I don't know.
So with the Wishing Tree Park we could spend all afternoon talking about Wishing Tree. It's right next to Del Amo and Montrose Superfund sites. I mean, in the most notoriously contaminated place besides 3 Mile Island. When they started, and there was a picture. Can you zip back? I want to show them Cynthia.
I think I left, but it's there.
Here, you can zip while I do it. They discovered bowling ball size, I'll show you who they are in a second, bowling ball size pieces of DDT in the backyards. And what's the shelf where all the DDT is offshore, right? Montrose has a second Superfund site in the ocean. So its origin was here, went through an open storm ditch, caked with white cake all the way through the neighborhood. Can you go to the one that shows the party at Wishing Tree with Cynthia in the background? There. That's Cynthia Babbage. Cynthia lived in that neighborhood, and she lived on the almost 10-acre parcel. It was small lot residential. She was involved in the initial discovery. What Bees and the Land Trust has done with respect to acquisition and programming and funding for the development of the park is huge. What Cynthia did for 25 years to get them to that point is huge in an entirely different way. She was able to get Shell to buy out all of the houses on the 9 acres that's now occupied by the park, tear them down, compensate the owners, relocate the owners, so that the offending substances could be removed. That's unusual, but that's one way to skin the cat. But you can probably only skin it if you've got Cynthia Babbage working for you.
Well, Markus, I think the other part of your question, when you said webbing, were you thinking about that completely horrible image that Richard showed of the drill sites going off in different directions? Yeah.
Yeah, good luck with that. I think the best thing you can do is stop it, right? What's been done has been done, and it's been done at depth. The process that exposed the neighbors to the offending substances was the doing of it, was the mixing of it, was the injecting of it. What's in the ground probably isn't going to affect. I mean, it's not a drinking water aquifer. It's probably not going to affect folks the way that the surface experience did. So the best way to protect the community is to stop doing what they were doing.
And I can maybe add to that, and some of this I'm learning from you, Markus, but those wells are plugged, and I think 2017 UCLA study found that a third of Angelinos live, so Angelinos, the county, live near an active or idle well. So this site kind of is representative of our county and others like it. If we wanted to drill again, if we wanted to operate again, we'd have to drill through concrete in any of those wells. So they're all plugged, but it does create a constraint for development, in terms of what the community envisioned with the community center, housing units, and a neighborhood park. If there's any kind of issue, maybe there's an earthquake and then something gets loose and then maybe there's gas or something building up, we would need to bring in heavy equipment to access that. So that creates a site constraint on these types of sites. So, that's not quite answering what you asked, but kind of adding a little more detail to what does this mean, moving forward.
Hi, thanks for a great presentation. I have a parks question, since I'm not very familiar with this world. But I've heard with parks, like one of the biggest challenges is not even necessarily building the park, but like getting a city or jurisdiction to accept the park and the ongoing operations and maintenance of that. And so I was curious how common of an issue that is for the land trust and how you solve for that.
That's a great question. One of the ways I can answer that briefly in the time we have, maybe we could have a longer conversation after the panel, is that, some of how we move through and try to find a model in each of our projects is based on what is needed, especially with community partners. So sometimes I get asked like, oh, what kind of parks do you guys want to build? And we don't really have an answer to that because we are, being a nonprofit land trust, like our model is we get invited to work on something like you've heard in these examples. And so sometimes what makes the most sense, like for example, buying directly from Shell or from Sentinel Peak Resources, it makes sense, or with a partner like Redeemer Community Partnership, it makes sense for us to make sure that that land tenure stays within the community control. Wishing Tree there's a little wrinkle there because we also have LA County. Other times we have a memorandum of understanding that we develop with jurisdiction, whether it's city or county or something else, to develop and then hand it over. So it's going to be very detailed, like what are the periods of time for the development and implementation of that design, some sort of like post-occupancy period, and then what is the plan moving forward from there. Go ahead, Markus.
I just wanted to, have you experienced complications, and I mean, we most recently worked on aspects of Wishing Tree, where the handoff is going to be to a public agency, to county parks, and ongoing maintenance funding is often a huge issue for them from the get-go. Can you talk a little bit about how you navigate that space?
You might know a little more than me, actually, with Wishing Tree. Are you thinking? Yeah.
All I know is that it's been contentious, and lots of departments, lots of agencies, not lots. I mean, some are visionary and they figure out this is good and I want to do it and I'm going to figure out how to get the money to maintain it. And maybe you can incorporate some adaptive design so it's a little less expensive. There's a little less green, a little more cactus, or I don't know exactly what it is that you would do. I don't know. It's less than half of the entities that I've worked with that you have to drag them kicking and screaming, and then at the end of the day, when it's finally built, they take credit for it. But who cares? So what? You got a park. It's nice.
Yeah, maybe I'll thank you. So yeah, when I say Markus may know more about it, Markus has been working really closely with our executive director, Tori Chair, who some of you may know. She couldn't be here today, but anyway. So yeah, she would have a wealth of knowledge as well on that particular project. I might just add that, I kind of blew quickly through our history in like a couple sentences, but the reason those folks came together 22 years ago to found the LA Neighborhood Land Trust was specifically to fill a gap where sometimes certain agencies are too big or too underfunded or overcapacity or something else, and then private developers don't quite fill the same need in terms of, they're constrained by profit margins and they may not always have the same kind of frameworks for working with community partners and so on and so forth. So I mentioned that to say, like, sometimes you have to look at who's at the table and be like, does it make sense is it worth it to go through the trials and tribulations because another entity is better set up for operations and maintenance moving forward than us? If so, it will be worth it to do that. Other times, it will be worth it to keep that property under our more direct stewardship. So I don't know, if there's a particular scenario you're thinking of, maybe we can connect later on it and talk more. But thank you.
There's absolutely, how much time do we have, Raina? We have 2 minutes, it's perfect.
Okay, I'll talk fast then.
No,
So-
take your time.
All right, you guys have a lot of experience with community outreach.
It's like I went to the microphone.
You three have a lot of experience with community outreach, and I was curious, what is effective? How do you get the community involved, and is it door-to-door knocking? Like, what works best?
Richard gets to go.
Yeah, I don't know if there's one thing that works best. I mean, I've lived in this neighborhood for over 30 years. My kids have grown up in this community, and we relate to folks as neighbors, right? We're in this together. And the advocacy around the Jefferson drill site really started by going door to door. The oil company wanted to drill 3 new wells. And so we decided to go and knock on doors. I mean, we found this out because I kind of watch this really obscure email listserv for crazy things that could go on in our neighborhood, and this popped up. And so, we went door to door, and, we talked to Miss QC, and she says, I was out watering my yard, and I was sprayed with oil. And we talked to Sunny next door, and Sunny says, the fumes and the diesel exhaust are so intense, even closed windows can't keep them out of our 2-year-old daughter's bedroom. We're gonna have to leave this neighborhood. And Oscar says, gosh, the deafening din of thousands of feet of pipe being driven into the ground, it's such a nuisance. And just, collecting these stories and then bringing people together to share their stories with each other. We do a lot of it's very relational and connecting the dots and helping people to meet each other and share those stories. That's been, I don't think there's a magic bullet. It's been very relational. I think that's the key thing. We really view our work through the frame of being neighbors. What does it mean to be neighbors here?
So I'll just to add on that, because all we have is beer after this waiting for us anyway. Richard has applied for a TAG, a technical assistance grant, to fund neighborhood outreach, and 2 of the things that perhaps if we win and win enough, that would be great to incorporate into this. One is to have it at a certain point or points along the way, a celebration with the Maywood community and the Wishing Tree community, because these are great things that great people are doing in isolated places, to bring people from different communities together, at least to me, feels like they'll be able to tell stories about what they experienced. They'll be able to capacity build and spread a word in a way that's different than just a great park, a great park, a great park. Now it's a great park, but also a great network of people and relationships that I think could facilitate much greater things in the period to come. So knock wood that the ECRG people see it and give us our money.
I think DTSC is in the house. I just want to say they did give us the award. We just found out. So.
You got it?
Yes. DTSC.
What a perfect way to end. I think we're good. Thank you so much for coming. This has been great.